A caravan of migrants from Honduras and other Central America countries is headed toward the United States seeking asylum. Thousands have reached the Guatemala-Mexico border. Many of them have made the entire journey by foot. President Trump has responded on Twitter. Thursday morning, he tweeted, in addition to stopping all payments to these countries, which seem to have almost no control over their population, I must, in the strongest terms, ask Mexico to stop this onslaught. And if unable to do so, I will call up the U.S. military and close our southern border. But there's tension within his administration about how best to handle the crisis. John Wagner is a national political reporter for the Washington Post. He joins me now. So, John, your reporting notes that there's been this internal disagreement within the West Wing about exactly how to proceed with the immigration debate. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I think as much as it's a debate over policy, this is just a reflection of the frustration in the administration right now. There was a spike in the number of migrant families arrested at the border in September, and that's been a great source of anger and angst for the president in particular. So what transpired yesterday was a shouting match outside the Oval Office between Chief of Staff John Kelly and National Security Advisor John Bolton, who'd been very hard on Homeland Security Secretary Kristen Nielsen for not being more aggressive. Kelly, who used to hold that job, came to her defense, and the two exchanged profanities. And again, I think it's largely a reflection of just the frustration they're in right now.
The administration is also considering this new policy. It's called binary choice. What exactly is that?
In some respects, that would be a return to the family separations policy that caused so much of an uproar just a couple months ago. Under this scenario, families would be given an option when they're detained to either remain essentially in a jail as a family, or their children could be released to a relative or perhaps a foster family.
We know the president's thrown out a lot of threats, John, against, Central American countries. There's been threats of cutting off aid, closing the border. But what does he actually have the power to do?
Well, he certainly would need the help of Congress to follow through on some of his threats. Congressional approval would be necessary to cut aid, to halt aid entirely. In terms of the military, it kind of depends on what you're talking about. There have been instances already during the Trump administration and the Obama administration as well of the National Guard being deployed to the border. They're really there in more of an assisting role, though. There's a law in the books that prevents the military from actually acting as border agents. So it would take Congress if they're going to do something far more broad than that.
What's been Mexico's reaction to this caravan, especially as it approaches? We know that the country's got this president-elect. He's going to take office in December. He's been campaigning on a much softer immigration stance. How have they been responding?
Well, I think we'll know a lot more in the next day or so, as you noted, given the location of the caravan at the border now, the border with Guatemala. The indication in the last couple of days, though, is that they're not going to treat these folks any differently than they would other migrants. If they, have the appropriate papers, they can come in. Otherwise, they will be deported. But we'll have to see how it plays out on such a large scale.
And what would you say are some of, it's such a heated debate when you talk immigration. People are so passionate about this on both sides. What are really some of the false messages that the president's been trying to spread with his statements at Twitter and at the rallies?
Well, I think the thing that frustrates Democrats the most, at least, is that he has blamed them for the current state of affairs, when in reality there were a couple bills backed by the president himself on immigration that he wasn't able to push through the Republican-controlled House. So that's probably the main thing, just the blame game.
When you look at sort of this anti-immigration message, how is it playing in swing states when you look at Montana, where the president was last night? Not just to the general public there, not just to the crowds of people, but to these Trump core voters. Is this message working?
Well, I think you've hit on kind of the part of the reason why this is being, made such a big deal. This is an issue that Trump's core voters do care a lot about, and in order for Republicans to exceed expectations on Election Day, Trump is really counting on his people to come out. If he can't get them excited, and since he's not on the ballot, they're more likely than not to stay home.
So if he knows that this is an issue that really rallies the base, how have Democrats responded to Trump's increased focus on the border?
They've been trying to stay disciplined and focus on health care, which they think is a winning message for them this year, and been pushing back against the notion that they're responsible for the uptick in arrests at the borders. But they really have tried to stay on script with other issues.
John Wagner with the Washington Post. John, always grateful you could join us to break this down.
Thank you.